Share my screen.
Okay, so hello everybody and welcome to Virtual Coffee Brownbag Edition. Virtual Coffee's mission is to be a welcoming tech community that allows room for growth and mentorship at all levels and to create meaningful opportunities for learning, leadership, and contribution for everyone. To find out more about our events, our code of conduct, and just to see what we're about, you can always check out our site, virtualcoffee.io. We are very happy you're all here with us today, and we really want to thank our presenter for being here. Today, we have the illustrious Nick Taylor. Nick Taylor is a lead software engineer at Forem, the software that powers Dev. He's a big fan of TypeScript, JavaScript, React, Preact, Node, C#, ASP.NET. Nick's done a lot. He's a very cool person, one of the wonderful members of this community. When he's not programming, he enjoys the gym, snowboarding, and a long time ago, rugby, but he's always ready to do it again. He's not a big fan of spiders, and he likes open source. And with that, I am going to hand it over to Nick. Take it away, Nick.
Cool. So thanks everybody for coming today to the talk. We're going to talk about debugging JavaScript today. I realize there's probably folks with different levels of experience with JavaScript. So if you're potentially more senior, some of this stuff might be like, okay, yeah, I've seen that before. But I'm hoping that everyone learns at least one new thing in here. And as Kirk mentioned and Becca mentioned, feel free to ask questions as we go along, because I have slides, but it's more to just say what we're about to talk about. And then we're going to kind of jump into the browser dev tools to just talk and show what we're discussing. So with that, we'll get started. Right. So that's me, as Kirk mentioned. I'm also from Montreal, Quebec, Canada. They have a poutine week here in the winter, if ever you want to come visit me. All right, so what are we going to cover? We're going to cover debugging in the browser. So we're going to see what the browser dev tools are. We're going to look at the browser console. We're also going to look at, we're going to start off with looking at console methods. So like console.log, for example. We're going to look at accessing source code files in the dev tools. Then we're going to gradually get to more and more things, and we're going to move on to log points, which is an evolution of console.log. You may have heard of it, you might not have. Well, anyways, it's an interesting thing. We're going to talk about the debugger statement, and we're going to go through creating a breakpoint, creating a conditional breakpoint, how to disable one or more breakpoints, removing one or more breakpoints. And then I don't know if this is the proper term, but we're going to talk about the debugging panel. So in the dev tools, there's 3 panels in there, one called the watch panel, the scope panel, and the stack trace panel. I'm going to be, most browsers have all this tooling in their browsers these days, but we're going to focus, I'm going to be in the Microsoft Edge Chromium browser for the demos here and stuff, but all this stuff applies in Firefox as well, and also Chrome. Safari has DevTools as well, but they're not as mature as these browsers. But I know I've been reading a lot that the Safari team is working on improving their developer tools. So if you have a chance, you can also check out the Safari technical preview. It's out of the scope of this, but just throwing it out there. After going through all that debugging within the browser, we're going to talk about how to debug a Node.js process. Now, when I say process, that could be like a Node.js script. It could be a website that you're running and it's the server, like Express, for example. And we're going to talk about some parameters you can add to the node command. So there's the inspect, and then there's the inspect-brk, which stands for break. And I'm going to show you how you can debug Node.js processes in the browser. And if we have time, I'm also going to go through how you can debug your web pages with VS Code browser extensions. So You can literally debug like you do in the browser, but directly within VS Code. And I'll also show briefly how you can debug a Node.js process in VS Code. All right, so let's get started. Hello, browser DevTools. If you've been doing web development for, a few months or years, at some point, I imagine even in boot camps, they hopefully show you the DevTools. But the DevTools are a part of the browser that allow you to see a lot of things. In the context of a web page, you can see markup, you can debug source code, you can view CSS styles, you can manipulate all these things in here too. But all the changes you make in here, they do not actually save to like if I modified the markup in this page, for example, and it would not save it to the actual page that I'm working on. This is just kind of it's kind of like a playground where you can manipulate things, test out things, and ensure everything's working properly. All right, let's keep going on. Now, one thing I want to mention about the browser DevTools, because I've seen this happen many times for folks that are using them, they end up with caching issues. So like they'll be like, I made changes to my JavaScript file and I'm not seeing the changes. So I'm showing Chromium-based settings here, but it's pretty similar in Firefox as well. There's an option, it's typically under the network tab, and it's called disable cache while DevTools are open. I've kind of zoomed into it there at the bottom right. It's really good to have this enabled while you're debugging, because it could lead to weird issues while you're debugging if you don't have it enabled. Yeah. All right, so we're going to start off with the browser console. So the browser console, as I mentioned, DevTools are available on all the browsers. So let's go take a peek in there. So I'm just going to switch to my browser. Actually, I am in my browser. It's a little inception here. I've got my slides in here. All right, cool. So there's different ways to open up the DevTools. I'm on a Mac, so you can do F12. It opens and closes them. You can do Command Shift I. There's several ways to do it. You can also go into the Tools menu, and there'll be a menu option there to open up the panel, the DevTools panel. So I'm just going to start off in here, and I'm just going to say console.log HiVC. And that it outputs HiVC. And this is just a quick demo to just show you like what the browser console is and where it's at. There's many tabs in here. This is like the markup that's rendered. The sources are for the source files. We'll get into that a bit later. But for now, that's just kind of a quick intro to the console. And let me switch back to my slides. All right, that is a skateboard emoji, because I feel like Kirk is probably going to ask me, because he was asking about my bug emoji. I had to copy paste it as an image as well, because it doesn't show up in the slides otherwise. Yeah, so let's talk about console methods. Console, you might be familiar with the console, like, because there's always on Twitter, at least, folks, what's your debugging tool of choice, and they'll say like console.log, and it is true in many cases. But it's not the only method that's available on the console object. There's another one called console.warn, info, error, during table. There's a lot more, but I'm just going to go through a few of these. At the end of the slide deck, there's resources that link to the console object on MDN. Feel free to check that out to see all the different ones in action. So I'm going to come back here to the browser console. I'm just going to zoom it in a bit so folks can see a little better. Okay, so we saw the console.log HiVC. We could do another one, which is console.warn warning VC. And it looks similar. The reason why you might want to do these different ones is it's more for filtering when you're looking through logs. So where is it here? So if I said I just wanted to show for example, warnings. Is that right? Yeah, there's only one here, there. It's just a different way of filtering things. You could also do like console.error. Oh no's. And you see up here, it shows that there's one error and one warning, and then there's console log messages. These are really more for filtering it, and they will only show up in the console. So it's not something that will affect your application really. If you're doing if you want to manage errors and stuff, stick to try catch, or if you're in promised land, you can also use not the promised land. If you're in promised land, you can use like .catch as well. But this is really just a different way to filter through things. And then if I go to info, I don't know why it's not filtering properly. I'm clearly doing something incorrect at the moment, but let me close this. Okay. All right. Oh, it's because the console's on the bottom. That's why. Sorry, that's my bad. Can I bring it up? There we go. Oh no, it's the same one. Anyways, you can filter it, and you can see there's different ones here. Now, these ones are kind of boring, I find. So let's look at something more interesting. I'm gonna just create an array. We'll say potato, tomato, Sharknado. I just thought of that. I feel pretty witty now. All right, so now I can do something else. I can do console.table, except I need to call it as a method. And then all of a sudden.
Quick question, Nick.
Yeah,
Someone
go ahead,
wanted to know, so are all console commands JavaScript? And I guess I have the question too, is this like a full JavaScript-like REPL?
Yeah, the browser console is kind of like a REPL, yeah. But it's within the context of a web browser, so that's why you have access to like window, for example. If you were in Node.js, you wouldn't have access to window. It would be there's a new universal object called global this, which you would have access to, or in Node that used to just be global, which will not show up here because it'll say, yeah, that says it doesn't exist. But yeah, you can do all kinds of stuff in here. So you can do, you can write function. You could do a dynamic import. You could call promise and stuff in here. But be aware, it's not a full-blown text editor, but you can definitely do stuff like you can write, like you saw me there before. I added an array here. I could also create a function, YOLO, and I could just.
I'm surprised you don't have that as a hotkey.
Yeah, I'm just in the matrix live coding, so I can do this. It creates a function, and then I can say YOLO, and it runs. The reason why you see undefined after all of these things is in JavaScript, if you don't return anything, the default return value is undefined. That's why even when you do console.log, it should log it out, but then it should say undefined after, because it's not returning anything. So the implicit return value is undefined.
Okay, so I think Dominic has a question, but before that, so Sahil is basically saying, are there non-JavaScript developer consoles, or are they always JavaScript?
In the context of the browser, it's only for JavaScript. Okay. You can access stuff in the document object model. It's out of the scope of this, but there's other panels in here. Like you can have Lighthouse comes with a Chromium base, but I have, like, for example, accessibility tools in here. So there's other kinds of panels that become available in here that if you do any kind of React development, you can add the React developer tools, which will add another tab to the developer tools. And then it's not necessarily a console, but it's like this extra tooling that you can inspect, like, for example, state and props and React stuff. Bingo is right. I don't know who that was because I can't see the screen, but yeah, So yeah, so like I said, we had console.table there, which is kind of an interesting one. I'm showing you these, and I honestly don't use a lot of these, but there's another one. You could do, you make an object, and you could say A1, B2, C3, and then you could say console.dir A, and you'll see it just returns the object and you can inspect it. You can also do this in console.log, like if you do hello, and then you can pass an object as a second argument, then it'll say hello, and then you can have access to the object too. These are all just different ways of how you can output information that could be helpful to developers.
Cool.
Before I move on, any questions?
Yeah, I think Dominic has a question.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so I have two questions about the console.table one. So first question is, so I see you demonstrated it with an array. Can you also use it with an object?
Yeah, so you can see here now, A is an object right now because I switched it. And in this case, it's outputting the key, which is the index, and then the value, which is the value for each property. You can also do it with, if we go a little further, if I say B equals A, and then let's add another YOLO because it's just fun to put YOLO. And then if I do console, excuse me, console.table B, this is gonna have nested, it's a nested object now, and you're gonna see it's not perfect. Like in the context of a table, it's not as perfect, but you'll see here for A, this is the top level property. It's gonna say it also has in it A with a value of 1, B with a value of 2, C a value of 3. But then there's another property, YOLO, and it has a value of 1. So it's kind of okay in terms of outputting for objects, but typically I'll do console.dir, and I actually don't know why it's called dir. The only thing that comes to mind is directory, like a tree structure. That's the only thing I can think of. But that's just me guessing. I don't want to fill the internet with lies.
The second thing I was thinking is, so does that also work? So if you're doing Node.js and you're running it in a terminal like Windows PowerShell, can you use console.table there? Will it output a nice table into the terminal?
Yeah, I believe it should. When we get to the Node.js stuff, we can validate that. But I'm pretty sure all the console methods will support the same thing. But yeah, I think it'll probably make an ASCII table. I think that's a good assumption, but we'll find out. That'll be the cliffhanger moment later on. Yeah. Before we move on, did anybody else have any questions?
There's one more question in the chat. So you were saying, you don't use all of these functions in the console all the time. So someone's wondering, which are the ones that you use the most often?
I'll use console.log and probably console.error maybe, because usually these we typically don't put console log statements in our code base. We have lint, ESLint rules for this. I linked to a resource at the end there where I have a blog post about setting up ESLint and all that. But you can definitely put them in. But if I do, it would probably be console.log and maybe console.error. Because when you do console.error, and if it's outputting to a console, like if you're running a Node.js process, I believe it shows up in red if you say error. So it's just more like a visual cue for me. Okay. Yeah. Cool. Anything else?
I think you're good to go.
All right. So now we're going to talk about accessing source code files in the DevTools. I'm assuming a lot of people use Visual Studio Code. Folks that have been around a little longer might have been using Sublime Text as well, or pretty much any editor these days, if you do Command P or Control P on Windows and Linux, you're going to get this panel that pops up, and you can just start typing files to look for a file name. And the same thing applies to the browser DevTools. So I'm just going to go to dev.to for a second, just because I didn't really want to set up a project for this. So I'm just going to clear this. Okay, so there's this sources panel, and I'm going to zoom back in a bit. I zoomed it out for. Okay, now you see there's folder structure on the left here, and you can find files this way. But this is, I find this personally cumbersome, you know, like, okay, where's homepage? Okay, I found it. What I prefer to do is, I'm just going to close all the files here for a minute. I'm going to press Command P, and all of a sudden you're seeing a list of files, and I'm going to go like, I'm looking for a file called base something. Okay, there, I see it. And all right, here, I come here. And I'm like, okay, I found it. And then I'm in the file, I can look through it. We'll get into debugging in here in a bit. But this is just to show, because some folks I've worked with before, they didn't realize that you can actually do Command P in here. There's also something else you can do, which is out of the scope of what we're talking today. But if you do Command Shift P or Control Shift P, you can get other things available in the developer tools. So it's more just to make folks aware of those shortcuts if you were not aware of them. All right. Okay. So we've seen console.log and console.warn and a few other methods. I'm going to show you log points now. Now, what are log points exactly? These were initially created for in VS Code, and eventually, I guess they were popular because VS Code's an Electron app, so it's running Chromium in there. I think they must have just discussed it and said it makes sense to just bring it into Chromium in itself, which is what Chrome is built off of, and the Microsoft Edge. And then eventually Firefox brought this feature in too. So think of log points as console.logs, but that do not litter your code base, as in you do not write console.log in your code. You will come into the developer tools and you'll add a log point. So if I go back here, so to add a log point, we'll look at a file like we were a second ago there. You open the context menu, whether that's through keyboard shortcuts or right clicking or whichever click you have to open up the context menu for yourself. And then you're going to click on add log point. And from there, it's going to kind of put a bit of spacing between the two lines of code. And it's going to say log point. And then you can see in the placeholder text there, it says, for example, add a log message, comma, potentially an object or something, or some variable. So that's what we're going to do now. So we're going to come here and side note, but we have a lot of buts variables in the Forem code base. I've been slowly trying to get rid of buts. Anyways, okay, so let's come down to the bottom here, I guess. Okay, so I'm going to put a right click. I'm going to say add log point. Whoops, it'd help if I actually added it. Okay, and I'm going to type a message. We're doing log points, folks. And I'm going to press enter. And you're going to see there's this special icon in there now. So I'm going to open up the console as well. You can show both at the same time. If you press the escape key, it toggles the console from showing and hiding, but you can also just go to the console tab. But in this case, I'm going to just stretch this up a bit because I just want to show you it in action. So we don't, so just to be clear, we don't have any console log statements in the code. I'm going to refresh the page and we should see our log point message. Oh, except I have a breakpoint, which is not what you're supposed to see yet. Spoilers. Oh no. Okay. Did it go? Did my log point? Oh, I'm in the wrong file. Did it go? Wait. Where is my log point? Okay, maybe that file didn't get called right away. I'll just put it up top here. Let's say init notifications. And I'll say add log point. We're doing log points. And because this is a demo, it may not load. Why is it not showing? Oh, geez. Oh, wait, am I filtering maybe? Console.
Adam says you might have to wrap it in quotes.
Just because the
Oh,
example,
wait,
it looks
yeah.
like it's a console log, so it needs to be wrapped in
Yeah,
quotes so
yeah.
it can be accepted. That's
Yeah. No, that would make sense. That's just called Nick. You don't know what you're doing. Okay.
I'm right there with you, so don't worry.
Yeah. You know, hey, there's an example. Just follow the example. Okay. Log points. Okay. There we go. Okay, now let's refresh. There you go. Now you see down here in the console, we've got log points, the word showing up, and that's what we have. I just deleted it, but that's what we had in the log point. And as you can see, there's no console.log. This is something that you can add to your tool belt. I'll be honest, I don't use this that much either. I tend to not really do console.logging a lot. A lot of it's more like when I run into problems, I'll end up debugging through the code, which we'll get into. But this is just another thing that you can add to your tool belt. Maybe it's for you, maybe it's not. Do anybody have any questions about log points aside from, yes, they need to be wrapped in quotes? Okay. So yeah,
one question, Nick. So this is available. I mean, we can see like it's available for JS. Is it also available for TypeScript? Do you think should still work?
Yeah. So TypeScript's out of the scope of this, but TypeScript gets compiled down to JavaScript. So log points, everything we're going through today is available in TypeScript. So even if you write TypeScript in Node.js, or if you're using Dino, which is TypeScript out of the box, or just vanilla JS, or sorry, plain JS, all these things will work for all those things. The main difference is when you're working with something like TypeScript, or even if you're using Webpack, which is what we're using in the Forem code base, you'll end up with something called source maps, which are the code you wrote, and it maps to the code that it gets compiled down to. It's out of this kind of scope of what we're talking about here, but I encourage you to check out source maps on your own time there. Happy to talk about them after the talk if you'd like to. But yeah, in a nutshell, Kirk, anything that compiles down to JavaScript, all these features are available.
Cool.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So is there a way to just press a button and it clears out all the log points when you're done with them?
I haven't tried it, but there probably is, because you can clear breakpoints. Let's add a blog point again. Whoops, that's breakpoint. Let's go test. Okay, so I feel like it just added. Okay, so it adds the log point kind of under the breakpoints tab here. See if I disable it. So you can clear it out like you would with breakpoints, which we'll talk about in a bit.
Okay.
Cool. All right. Any other questions before we move on? Whoops. Okay. All right. I guess we're going to talk about the debugger statement now. So what is the debugger statement? This is a way of pausing execution of a program in a code way. So you literally type the word debugger in the code, and if you have the developer tools open in your browser, it will stop at assuming your code, like for example, in the example screenshot here, this is a Google Analytics function to load up Google Analytics. If that runs on line 69, I did not pick that number on purpose. That's totally random. It's gonna hit the debugger and it's gonna freeze execution of the program then. So why would you want to do this? This is just another thing you can put in your tool belt if you want to stop the execution of the program and then start debugging from there. So let's go back here, and I'm going to do something. So like we were showing before, when Kirk was asking if there's like a full replet, I'm just going to create a function in here, and I'm going to run it. This is called an immediately invoked function when you put it in brackets, parentheses, and then run it right away. So I'm just going to say debugger, and I'm going to say console.log YOLO, and I'm going to, just for fun, I'm going to put a variable up top here. Some var equals Kirk is awesome. All right, and I'm going to press enter, and this function is going to run right away, and it's going to stop on the debugger, except I have a syntax error. Okay, oh yeah, okay. Okay, so a few things here. One, I wrote a function in the browser console, and I decided to run it right away. There's different ways you could do this. I could also do it by like giving the function a name and then just calling the function after. I was just doing it in a quicker way because it's just to demonstrate the debugger. So you can see here at this point, the program has stopped, and there's some interesting things happening here now. So we're on line 3, but if I hover over now, you can see the developer tools are giving me information about some variables in here. There's these panels on the right, which we'll talk about later, the scope, call stack, and there's a watch panel as well. But this is kind of neat because you're like, okay, you know, something breaks every time Kirk is awesome, I guess. So let's see what's going on. So I put the debugger in, and I'm like, okay, well, no, it looks legit. Kirk is awesome, and the console log runs. And you can use on the right here, you can see there's arrows to do different things. You can say step over things. You can go into things. So like if it's a function, it will go into that functions code and then you can start going through there bit by bit. You can also step out of a function, and you can use these arrows, but I prefer using the keyboard. So these are mapped to the F keys. So for example, if I press F10, it goes to the next line. And let me just bring up the console for a sec here and let's clear that. I'm going to press F10 again. It's going to run that line console.log YOLO, and you'll see in the console, it shows YOLO. The program still stopped here because I've only been, it's what you call stepping through the code. So at this point, I'm just going to say, okay, well, everything looks good. So you can either press the blue play button here, or again, I use the keyboard key. So I press the F8 key and it just finishes running. So that's kind of this is really a high level demo of the debugger statement, but hopefully you can see that this can be something pretty powerful in your tool belt, because you're like, I need to see what's going on. So like, let's just pop this in here and stop execution of the program. And let's kind of figure out like, what are all these variables to set? You know, like if you're working in React, you might be like, okay, what's the state currently? You know, what else is going on? So it's a really handy tool to have. Did anybody have any questions about the debugger?
I do.
Yeah.
I
sure,
don't. I don't know how much detail you want to go into with that, but every time I use the debugger, and I do use those arrows up there to step over or step into or whatever.
Yeah.
I always end up getting lost in code that I didn't write.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't know how
no.
to. I'm pressing the wrong buttons, obviously, because I don't want to go there. So if you have
Like when
guidance.
you say so when you say you're going into the wrong code, so like you mean it, do you think it's going into like a third party pack, like an npm package? Like for example, if I'm importing some function that says, you know, convert camel case to Pascal case, and it's some function from some npm package, and you step in there, is it going into that code and that's where you kind of get lost, or is it something else, or you
Well,
just honestly have no idea where it's going?
I don't know where it's going, but so maybe I don't fully understand which button to press when to go where I want, but
Okay.
it'll, it's doing something and then I press a button and it goes, and it can be like forever if I'm just stepping line by line through code. That is just not going to work. Because sometimes it's just so much code. All I know is it's code I didn't write. So it's something happening behind the scenes.
Okay, so I'm just going to add another function here just to spice things up. And say hi. Okay, let me just let this finish running. Okay, let's do this again. Okay, so right now I'm doing F10 and or stepping over. So that means like I'm not going into the code. Like I'm staying within the code I'm in. So like, for example, if I press F10 again, I'm over the hi function now. If I'm like, I know the hi function works, I don't need to go in to see it say console.log or hi. So I'm like, I'm just gonna step over it. So you can either click the step over, which is the F10 key or the arrow here, and I can go right over the function, and that's all good. That's if you don't want to go into code that you don't need to, that's what you can do. But if I run it again, so I'm going to step over here now, and now I'm going to say I want to go into it, and then all of a sudden I'm in this other function, and I think I'm just guessing because this has happened to me before. I'll be debugging something and all of a sudden I'm in like the React code. And like you don't really need to be in the React code unless you're digging into some potential bug, which is probably unlikely. But I think what's happening is you're probably ending up in third-party code. And what you can do is, I'm trying to remember where it is. There's, let me see, there's something what you can do. I'm trying to remember where the setting is. You can basically black box scripts. So if I come here, whoops. Where are the settings? Oh, here, sorry. Okay, so there's a bunch of stuff here and I can't remember where it is. Maybe it's library code. Okay, yeah. So you can add a list in here of stuff. Like, for example, I could say node modules, for example, and it would skip anything in node modules. Or if if I'm using Vue or Svelte, I could add them here. They'd probably be included with the node modules, but if you wanted to get more granular, you could say like, when it's a file matching this pattern, don't go into that code. It's considered black box in the sense that whatever it does, it just returns you whatever it needed to, and it won't go in there for you. So that could be something that you could do as well. But definitely the next time you run into it, we can definitely check it out. But I have a feeling it's one of those things. Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, no problem. Anybody else have any questions? Okay. I'm just going to remove that setting because
I have a quick question for, I don't know if it's a quick question or not, but I'm wondering, like, what are the best use cases for the debugger? Sometimes I feel like I try to use it and it's like, no, this just isn't the tool that I need. Yeah.
Again, I'm just showing you these tools. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to use all these tools. The times I use the debugger are, for whatever reason, sometimes the debugging session it goes kind of wonky, and we'll talk about breakpoints shortly, but like you can say stop the code in the DevTools without adding a debugger statement. But it's happened to me on several occasions where, for whatever reason, I have this breakpoint and it's just not stopping there. So I literally type in debugger in the code and it's guaranteed to stop the code then. So that's typically when I use it, because again, you don't want to, this ties into ESLint rules and stuff, but you don't want to be committing code with like accidental debugger statements in it potentially. But yeah, that's the main use case I've had, is just when, for whatever reason, I don't have a technical reason why the debugger doesn't work sometimes, but explicitly putting the debugger statement in will guarantee that it stops in that code, assuming that code's running.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so let's move on over. Okay, we did that. Okay, so yeah, we talked about breakpoints briefly, which is a good segue because that's where we're at now. So what is a breakpoint? So a breakpoint is it acts like the debugger, except you're not writing in code anything. You're using the developer tools, the dev tools in the browser. This is something that has existed in all kinds of languages. Like when I was doing .NET, you could put breakpoints. Java, you can do this. All kinds of editors support this, like anything from IntelliJ, you know, VS Code, Sublime with plugins, I believe. So we're going to go over how you create a breakpoint. We're also going to talk about a conditional breakpoint, and then we're going to go over how to disable one or more breakpoints and also removing one or more breakpoints. All right, so let's come back here. So, all right, so like the log point, it's similar. So we're going to right click or use your keyboard shortcut or however you get the context menu to open. And instead of a log point, I'm going to say add a breakpoint. And what's going to happen now is if I reload the page, the breakpoint is telling the developer tools, when you hit line 4 in this piece of code, I want you to stop. And that's what's just happened. Now, like the debugger, this is good because you're pausing the execution of your program, and then now you can start trying to figure out like what's going on. Like maybe I'll put one down here, you know, and I'll let that run, and then it stops there. And then maybe I want to see, you know, in this case, it's running all these functions here. But if you have variables, for example, like maybe if we go in here, there's some old code in here. Let's try maybe fetch notifications count. This one, maybe that'll run. Okay, it doesn't hit there. But like the debugger, as I was mentioning, it will stop execution of the program. And I'm just trying to find one where else it's going to stop with some more information. But init pagination, that sounds like it might be good. Whoops. Okay, so you see here, it's hit the breakpoint, and then all of a sudden I can start inspecting some things. Like this was getting some elements, but this appears to be no elements found. So in this case here, we're not going to do anything. And then once it's paused the execution of the program, you can keep doing what I was showing before, which is like you can step over code, you can step into code. So I can go into this function, then can keep going like that. So you have all the same tools in your tool belt again. Once the program is stopped, you can inspect things, go through the code. So this is typically what I will do when I'm debugging code. Now, what's interesting here is, you know, this is great, but maybe in my case, I want to only stop when like some condition has been met. So I'm trying to find an example in here, but if not, I can make up one. In fact, actually, I'll make a fake one, but what we'll do here is let's come back up to the top. I'm going to put breakpoint here and here. Okay, so now we're going to do what's called a conditional breakpoint. So you can either edit an existing breakpoint or you can create a new one just by right clicking, and you can say add conditional breakpoint. And like the log point, it's gonna give you some placeholder text to show you what you can do. This time, Nick, you should follow what the example says. So in this case here, I'm gonna just make up a variable because just for this demonstration. So I'm gonna say window dot YOLO equals 1. Now you're gonna see it's still got a breakpoint icon, but it's kind of got this half moon in it, and that's just to distinguish that it's not the same as a regular breakpoint. So what I'm going to show here now is, let's just let that play through. Okay, I'm going to refresh the page. It's going to hit the first breakpoint always because it's not a conditional breakpoint. Now, if you remember here, the condition was if window.YOLO equals 1. So what's going to happen here now is if I press F8 or press the play button to continue, it's not going to stop at that breakpoint. It's going to go to these other ones I have, which I'll remove. But so that's kind of cool. So, you know, this is super handy because imagine you're looping through, I don't know, 100 items and one item keeps giving an error. And it's when, you know, the items dot published value is undefined or something, and it's causing a bug in the code. So we need this code to execute, you know, but we don't want to stop like 100 times just to check, okay, is it this? No. Okay, is this? No. So that's what the beauty of the conditional breakpoints are. So I'm going to refresh the page again. It's going to stop on the first breakpoint. I'm going to create that variable now. So window.YOLO equals 1. Now I'm going to press the F8 key again, or you can click the play button, and you're going to see it stopped here now. To me, that's super powerful because it will save you a lot of time. Because I gave an example of 100 items, but imagine you're looping through 1,000 items. You know, you could be wasting a lot of time. So this is where conditional breakpoints really shine. Did anybody have any questions about the conditional breakpoints or breakpoints in general?
I think Sahil was wondering if it's like pry in Ruby. I'm not familiar with Ruby, so I'm not sure.
Yeah, so pry is a debugging tool. I'm not super well versed in Ruby and Rails, but I work with it because that's what the back end is for the Forem code base. But yeah, it's the same idea. So pry, the difference with pry though, pry is more like the debugger statement because you actually, at least from my experience with it, and if there's Rubyists here, please tell me otherwise, but I think to debug Ruby code, you have to put that explicit pry statement in your code for it to actually run, but I could be wrong. I think Mike's in here too, so he might have more information about that, but
Yeah, pry, it can work in 2 ways. You can, like for debugging, you do put pry like a line in your code, but it's also can work as sort of a console that you enter into and kind of debug that way.
okay. Cool,
And
cool.
it's just, and I believe it's just for Ruby, and for Rails, like I think there's kind of a different flavor to work with Rails.
Okay, cool. One thing I wanted to mention about the breakpoints, in case it's not obvious, you might be like, hey, this isn't working, like you're clicking. You have to literally click on the number in the code for it to activate. Same thing when you right click. If you right click over here, you're not going to get the context. Oh, okay, for that you do, but for explicitly setting a breakpoint, you have to click it there. Okay, so if there's no other questions about the breakpoints, I'm just going to show you how you can disable them. So like, let's run this again. So you're going to see all these breakpoints run. So I'm going to go there, stop, 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 and they all run. Okay, so there's a few ways you can do this. You're going to see there's this breakpoints panel here. So you could remove them. This is disabling them. If you uncheck them, you can see they're getting grayed out. That's one thing you can do, because like maybe you're like, I want to keep it around, but I just don't really want it running right now. The other thing you can do, which I believe if you right click, yeah. So you can say enable all breakpoints. So yeah, however you open your context menu in your browser, you can say deactivate all breakpoints, and then you can also say remove all breakpoints. So that's just if you wanted to do a bit of cleanup. Any other questions about that? Okay, I think we can move on to the debugging panels then. So the debugging panels, we're going to go through a few here. There's one called the watch panel, one called the scope panel, and then there's another one called the stack trace panel. The stack trace is something that's in all programming languages. It's all the things that have been executed, they get put on a stack. So let's go take a peek here. Let me come back to the dev code. So I'm going to put a breakpoint here. I'm going to refresh the page again. Okay, so I'm just going to stretch over here and I'll zoom it in a bit. Okay, so you're going to see here, there's a few things. You can add watches here, and what watches are like, you know, what is some particular piece of code, what's its value at this time. So you can come in here and you could say like window dot forum, for example. It's undefined right now, but if I come into, I'm just going to go into another file. So remember Command Shift P or Control Shift P. Okay, that file's not there yet. Okay, but you can see here right now it's saying window.forum is undefined. I'm going to fake things here, but like if I come to the console, say window.forum equals an object now. We come back here, I might have to refresh it. But you see all of a sudden it's an object now. And this is kind of handy if maybe think of it kind of like with Scratchpad. You can keep stuff here that you're following along with, but you could also just create things in here. Like I could say, you know, like maybe I'm trying to build something out. So I'll say like there's that object, or window.yol doesn't exist anymore, but I can literally, anything that's JavaScript you can put here. So I can say like hello, enter. This is kind of a useless thing to do in here, but it just outputs what this variable or this statement is. So this is something that another thing you can put in your tool belt. I don't use it too often. There's the breakpoints panel, which we're looking at. The scope panel is interesting. So when we talk about scope, we're talking about like where are we in the program? You know, what's kind of going on. So let's try and go somewhere where there's variables and stuff. We'll go back to here, the paginators. So sounds like a TV show, previously on the paginators. Okay, so you're gonna see here in the scope panel, all of a sudden you're gonna see this section called local, and it's gonna say paginators, and it's an HTML collection. So that paginators here is this local variable. And so when we talk about scope, we're saying this is the local scope. So think of it as like anything between two squiggly brackets, that the current squiggly brackets, that's the local scope. That can be a function, it can be you know, within just parentheses. Like if you're in an if statement, like you have const and let now, those things would be showing up in that scope too, potentially. There's this, which is the window object, which is always available, but there's other interesting stuff, like there's the global. So this is stuff that's available everywhere. So you can see all these, again, like I was saying, there's a lot of but in the code here, but these are all functions that are globally available, and that's why they're showing up under this global scope. So this is kind of handy too. It's kind of like an introspection tool to just see like, what's the lay of the land of, you know, I'm in my current function, what's available to me, okay, what's available globally. Then there's also the script, which I haven't really used, honestly, but I imagine that's the scope of the current script running, I believe. I'm not positive about that. So that's an interesting panel too. So that was the watch, the scope. And then there's the stack trace panel. So this is interesting because you can kind of, it's not time traveling, but you can kind of see like, okay, we're in init page notification now. So that's why there's the blue arrow here. This is what's currently on the stack, because the way the program will work is like, once things are done executing, they come off the stack. This is a programming concept, but what's interesting about this is you can see like, okay, init pagination, okay, how did we get here? If I go back, okay, it was called in init notifications. Okay, but where's init notifications called? Oh, it's called in call initializers. And then you can kind of drill down, and then you can like, you know, and this is kind of helpful too, because you'd be like, okay, so my problems start happening here. So I'm going to put a breakpoint here now. So it's kind of like I call it like a little detective tool. And yeah, I won't go too much into what stack traces are and the call stack, but it's essentially the execution of the program, and it's different points of it. And as things get executed, they come off the stack. That's something I encourage you to check out after the talk if you'd like to, or feel free to speak to any of the call stack or stack trace aficionados in the virtual coffee. So that's pretty much it for the panels. Did anybody have any questions before we move on? Okay, cool. All right, so now we're gonna work on a Node.js process. So as I mentioned, you can debug in the browser a Node.js process. I don't know if a lot of folks know this or not, but that was like the original way, or I don't know if it's the original way, but it was and still is a pretty common way to do this. So I'm in Drew's protege project here right now, and there's this function in here which seeds the database with data. So this is just so we can get some job listings for testing purposes when we're doing local development. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run node, and I'm in VS Code here, but you can run this from the terminal. You can run this from like any other editor. And what I want to show here is you have this argument that's being passed in, this -- inspect -brk, and then it's calling the file that we want to run. So this is going to start node, and it's going to, if I just press enter, you're going to see all of a sudden it says debugger listening on WS, which is WebSocket, and it's listening on this port, and it's telling me like, okay, I'm ready for you to debug this application. So I'm going to come back to the developer tools. Let's just open it here. Now, one thing I want to show you is all of a sudden there's this green icon. That's the Node.js icon. So if you click on that, it's going to open up the DevTools. And I think it's because I'm running multiple browsers. Okay, maybe that's why. Hold on a sec. It's supposed to load it up. Well, it will load it up, but let me just stop that for a second. I'm going to open up Chrome. I think it's has to do with because I'm running different things, but let's just open up this. And for some reason I think I have some accessibility feature running at the moment. Okay, you can see the icon here too. Okay. So I'm going to open this up, and then all of a sudden I have access to that file. This is right here. Let's go in there. And you can see all of a sudden the execution of the program is stopped. So before we go through this, just to reiterate, I started a node process in debug mode, and all of a sudden we're in a Chromium-based web browser, and we're able to use literally all the tools I've already showed you, but for Node.js. So you have everything still. You have the watch, the breakpoints, the scope, call stack panels. Everything is available to you here. I'll just zoom in a bit here. Okay, so now I'm going to put some breakpoints in. So let's put one here. Let's maybe put one here. Just going to put a few here in case there's an error. All right, so I'm going to run. All right, so what's going on here is it's going to create 10 jobs. That's what this array 10 here is. So it doesn't matter what we're looking at, really. It's really more to show you that I'm in a web browser. I'm debugging a Node.js process. And this would also apply to like if you were running like an Express server or some kind of backend node service, same thing. So I'm going to run here, let it run. So all of a sudden you can see the job. I have all this information about it. I can look in the panels over here. You can see here's all the job information. And you know, there's more information. There's stuff that's available within the closure, like this is a Firebase thing. And you can see what's available globally. So it's literally everything that you have access to normal. And now that we have some data in a real thing, I'm going to just add a watch here just to show you. So now I can see that here's the job seat. Now this could be interesting too, because you add the watch here. And if you can see here, we're mapping over an array 10 times. So if I press F8 again, you see how the job is changing on the right there. So this is kind of handy for the watch window. So you can kind of see like what's changing, or it's kind of like a handy way to just see what's going on in the process. So this is just a very quick demo of just the ability to be able to debug a Node.js application. You know, so you don't need to own some super expensive IDE or anything. I mean, VS Code is free, but yeah, that's essentially it. And then once you're done, you just press Control-C and it stops the process. And then we're all good. Any questions at this point?
We have one question kind of open to everyone.
Yep.
So he was asking, is it recommended to use a browser dedicated for developing, one that doesn't have many extensions, etc.? I guess it's a little tangential to this, but still, yeah, best practice.
Yeah, I mean, if you're doing web development, it doesn't really apply to when you're debugging Node.js, but this has happened to me in the past. Clients have reported issues on a site, and it turns out that it was a browser extension that was actually messing up the site. So typically when, you know, everybody has their own extensions running, like I've got, like you can see at the top here, I've got like 1Password, uBlock, the Axe tools, webbing. I got a bunch of things running here. So I don't think it's a bad thing. But when you do run into issues, this is more a general thing. Like if ever somebody comes to you and say like, yeah, the website's doing something weird, it's a good idea to always say, can you please test it with browser extensions disabled, just to make certain that it's not an issue with a browser extension. Because for folks who may not be too familiar with browser extension development, you're able to actually make changes to the page and stuff. So you can inject CSS, you can add JavaScript, and these things could potentially affect how your site is working. So that's more, I know it was tangential, but it's more like whenever somebody does report a bug, and we have it in our, I don't know if we have it in our Forem template for bugs, but definitely always ask folks to disable browser extensions before trying to file a bug, because just to make certain that it's really the application and not some extension doing something potentially nefarious. I was looking to say that word, so thank you. Okay, any other questions?
So it would seem that for console log, or yeah, for logging stuff and breakpoints, that is if you have the code in front of you, you can throw all that stuff in. But then there's let's say you're on a team where you don't want console logs, right? So you'll have to manually, either comment them out or remove them. So it seemed like that would work if you're down with that, or you can do log points and breakpoints, which I guess would be on the live side or production side or development side, whatever.
Yeah.
but live real-time debugging, basically. If you had an issue and you need to pinpoint it, you could use the log points and the breakpoints and have control in the browser and know that you can just kind of like turn things off and on, basically have a GUI, right? It seems like
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and that's what we do. Like when I was demoing that stuff before with the breakpoints and the conditional breakpoints and all that, that was the live dev.to site. That's not me running it locally. So
Right.
we were in a real site. So
you can even, yeah, so you don't, so I guess breakpoints and log points are great for like if you don't have access to that code, you can kind of jump it, like whatever's available to you, which is
yeah,
most,
exactly.
right? Cool.
Yeah, yeah, and it's pretty powerful. And then there's a whole other topic of like, observability, which is a whole other like topic which I don't have a ton of experience with, but this is like just being aware of how your application's operating and stuff. There's companies like the Honeycomb, I was thinking of Charity Major's name. There's companies like that, New Relic, they do those kinds of things. Those are, getting as much information about a problem is super helpful. So if your application can be set up like that, that's definitely great too. But yeah, these are all things like just nice to have in your tool belt, like, yeah, I can't console log or I can't add an explicit debugger because this is prod code, or it's like, it's some client site, or like, who knows, it's, a relative saying like, hey, my bank site's not loading or something. And you just jump into the debugger and go take a peek with the blog point or breakpoint. So yeah, no, for sure.
Cool. Thank you.
Cool. I know we're running a little late, so well, not late, but I think we're like pretty much close to the hour, Kirk. Is that right?
I mean, technically we're over the hour, but it's fine.
Yeah. I won't go into it today. Then I'll show you Node.js briefly. But so how you saw how I was able to debug Node. Let me just hide that directly in the browser. I'm going to start the Node debugger again. Whoops, I got to get out of here. Close that. Okay, cool. Let's close this. 1 sec. I'll show this briefly. So this is going to run the Node debugger inspector. Now I'm in VS Code now, and we're going to do the same thing. There's a configuration for debugging that you can do. You can add this to your project. I added one to attach to Node directly. So when you choose these configurations, you just click on, this is only in the context of VS Code, but you can do this in other editors too, like WebStorm makes this very easy too. If you're a .NET developer, all these developer tools are available. Actually, Node.js process, I'm not sure, but basically there's all these kind of canned configurations that you can pick from that VS Code offers you. Some of these require extensions, so I was going to demo debugging your website in VS Code as well, but just for the sake of time, I'm not going to. But there's extensions which I linked to in the resources. Like there's one for Microsoft Edge, for Chrome, for Firefox, and it allows you to run your site in the browser and then do literally everything I've shown you today, but within the context of VS Code. So in this case, though, I'm going to choose my configuration to attach to Node. And I'm going to you can press F5 or press the play button and just give it a second. And all of a sudden, we're kind of in the same scenario like we were in the browser. So I'm in VS Code right now in a Node.js process, and I can do literally all the same things again. So I'm just going to put a breakpoint here. Okay, I already have one. So I'm going to just run this. And then you're going to see here, again, just like the browser, like I was showing you, you have literally all the same tools to you. You have this is called variables here, but this is the scope panel in the browser. You have the watch, so you can do job seed, for example, and then you can see all that. So it's literally, I wouldn't say literally all the same, but it's pretty much what you have in the browser too. So this is just kind of a quick demo to show you that you can debug a Node.js process as well within VS Code. And you can also do debug your browser in VS Code as well. I don't know about other editors offhand, but maybe they offer this too. Visual Studio, which is not Visual Studio Code, but visualstudio.net, you've been able to debug like Internet Explorer and like probably Edge. I haven't used Edge in there, but that's existed since like the late 90s. So anyways, yeah, so that's kind of a whirlwind tour of debugging JavaScript within the browser for web pages, and also a quick demo of how you can do this within the context of a Node.js process as well. And here's just a bunch of resources you can check out. Like you can see here, there's some extensions for Visual Studio Code. There's something called the remote debugging protocol, which I have links to. This is how you're able to debug, for example, your website within VS Code. So that's pretty much it. The slide deck is available if you want to check it out at imdeveloper.com/debug2021. And we've been doing questions throughout, but if anybody has any other questions, feel free. And if not, that's all, folks. So fire away if you have any questions still.
Before we jump into the questions, I just want to take the time right now to say thank you very much, Nick, for this presentation. I didn't know a lot of this, and I was like, oh, I think I'm pretty good at debugging, but it was really cool, and I've already found some things that I'm going to start to add to my workflow. And I think everyone agrees that this was really helpful. Because I remember, I think you got this idea from another talk or another conversation where you realized like, oh, it might help if somebody like talked about these types of things. So I really appreciate that too.
Well, it's fun to talk about too. And thanks for having me.
Anytime. Okay, so I know it is 1:19. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pause the recording now. Nick, if you have a little time to stay on, if people still have questions, we could totally do that. But for now, I want to say thank you for everyone that came. We always continue these conversations in the Slack, so we can always talk more about it here. I'm sure Nick is happy to answer questions if people have that like for later. And yeah, just to remind everyone, check out the newsletter. It always lets you know what's happening in terms of VC events for the month. And we have a lot more amazing brown bags coming up. So definitely check them out. But once again, thank you, Nick. And I'm not going to forget to hit stop recording.
All right, cool.